All right, welcome to today's class. What is and how to create a Buddhist practice? I've been asked a lot about, what is a practice? A practice is what you're doing to prepare yourself to be an enlightened being. And there's many different types of practices and many different ways to practice. The first thing we need to understand is we've had a class on each one of these branches: the Theravada, Mahayana, and the Vajrayana. It's important to understand that they're like, those Russian dolls. There's one within another and another. The Theravada is the foundation of both the Mahayana and the Vajrayana. There's some major differences, but it's still, that's the foundation. The differences are what is added on top of it. Mahayana, they've changed things. Mahayana changed the ideal of the arhat to the bodhisattva and the way to look at emptiness. That came over that. Then the Vajrayana, the tantric practices, that came over the top of the Mahayana. Even though when you see a lot of Buddhist books that are Tibetan books, they talk about Mahayana. It's considered a Mahayana as well as having its own branch. And each one of these branches, they practice in a little bit different way. There's a lot of similarities, but there are some differences. And that's what we're going to be looking at today, so you can get an understanding of what are the major components of a practice and what you might want to look at to create your own practice. The first thing, before we even talk about a Theravada shrine, is we need to discuss for a moment, where is the appropriate place to have a shrine. Excuse me. It needs to be a clean place. Ideally, if you had a room that you could donate, or use to as a shrine, that would be ideal. But a great many of us, we don't have that type of luxury or can't do that. So the best thing you can do is to find some place in a room outside of your bedroom and not a bathroom, and have it very clean, and have something kind of screened around it, or it shouldn't be just right in the middle of everything where everybody can see. For myself, what I've done is my office and my shrine are in the same room. Some of you have seen it. It's a lot of thangkas and then cabinet. But what I do is when I'm working, I've got Tibetan door hanging curtains that cover up the shrine, and then when I practice, I move the curtains off to a side. There's four things that Theravada shrine needs to have, and that's the image of the Buddha, flowers, candle or lamp, and incense. Now, the image of the Buddha can be a statue. I mean, even if you wanted to put a Tibetan thangka over the Buddha there, that would be acceptable. That's got to be in the middle, and that's got to be the highest of everything else. The rest of this we're going to talk about, because when you start putting the Theravada shrine together, you have to make your offerings, and there's a certain specific way that you do that. It's called Anjali, and this is the lady practice, the merit making, so you have a better rebirth. That's the premise of the Theravada practice, is better rebirth. You're not necessarily looking at the Arhat ideal, because that's going to take many lifetimes in their system. But you kneel down and you put your hands to your heart, and then you just take a minute to ponder that you're putting flowers on the altar to represent impermanence. You're putting candles on the altar for the light of the Dharma. You're putting incense on the altar and lighting it for moral conduct. So you do that, you center yourself, then you get up to the shrine and you make sure that the flowers, candles, and incense are all lit, and then you can begin your practice. The first thing that you will do after you get your offerings done is its prostrations. In the Theravada prostration, you can see here, you say, I take refuge in Buddha, I take refuge in the Dharma, I take refuge in the Sangha. And you start with your hands, and you're standing at that heart mudra position that we saw in the last slide, and then you will bend down, and you make sure that you're saying the prayer as you're bending down. You make sure that your hands, elbows, knees, and feet and head all touch the ground. Then you get up, you say the refuge prayer again, do the prostration, get up, say the refuge prayer, and do the prostration again. So you're doing 3 prostrations, and each one you say the prayer. We see in most schools and traditions something about to generate the altruism, to generate loving kindness. And this is the Theravada way that they open their practice up with this. And the thing I want to tell you is that these, I'm putting down the English translation of a practice. And if you are practicing with a group of people in a Sangha, you're going to probably be practicing in the language of the tradition. In this country, we've got Sri Lankan, and we've got Cambodian, we've got a lot of Southeastern Asian Theravadists, and they all practice in their native language. Sometimes they let you know what you're saying, they put the words underneath it, and sometimes they don't. It just depends on the sect and the tradition. And this is the translation of the development of loving kindness. May I have no enmity, may I have no hurtfulness, may I have no troubles of mind and body. May I be able to protect my own happiness. Whatever beings there are, may they have no enmity. Whatever beings there are, may they have no hurtfulness. Whatever beings there are, may they have no troubles of mind and body. Whatever beings there are, may they be able to protect their own happiness. So that's said to generate altruism and a good heart. Now, when you do chant these things, if you are doing them in a group, you're not going to have a lot of time to ponder. But if you're doing this at home, your home practice, after you say these, the instruction is to not hurry, to be very quiet and reverent with saying these, and then to pause after each phrase is chanted and to ponder what you have just, been chanting. So that's the first element of the practice after the prostrations. The next is reverence to the Buddha. We pay reverence to the Buddha because we are very grateful that he agreed to share what he learned. If you know the story of the Buddha, he wasn't really sure after he was enlightened if he was going to share this. And eventually he decided that's what he was going to do. And there have been people, the Theravada tradition, I don't know how much they believe other people are enlightened. The Mahayana knows that some people are enlightened beings, and the Vajrayana believes that many people are enlightened. The difference between enlightened beings today and the Buddha is the Buddha figured this out all on his own. There's nobody there to teach Buddha Dharma. The Buddha was one that figured it out. Other people that have become enlightened beings, it's because of the Dharma, because of what the Buddha gave, that they became enlightened beings. So we're all going to hopefully become enlightened beings sooner than later, and we're very grateful that somebody came and helped us figure this out. So you pay reverence to the Buddha. Now, before we even, we need to mention here for a minute that refuge prayer, and going for refuge, is very, very prominent in the Theravada tradition. We started out prostrating and doing the refuge prayer. Now you're supposed to say the prayer at least 3 times in the day and 3 times at night. So what they're doing here with this refuge prayer is they're going to make sure that you say it for all. You need to say it for a total of 3 times in the morning, 3 times at night. We're going to do all of it here today, and we'll put one in for extra credit. Because you talk about to the enlightenment I go for refuge, to the way to enlightenment I go to refuge, to the enlightened community I go to refuge, which is Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Then you go for the second time to the enlightened one, and second time to the other, second time to the third, then the third time to the enlightened one. And each instruction is after each one of these, the first, the second, the third, you take a brief moment to ponder what the refuge prayer is all about. Now, when you become a Buddhist, you are taught the refuge prayer, which you agree to say 3 times in the day and 3 times in the evening, and you agree to try to follow the 5 precepts. And we talked about this a great deal in the first class. The term, as I undertake the training rules, is what this is really supposed to be translated as. It's sometimes they don't put the undertake the training rule. And it's important because these are not commandments. What they are their ways to train your mind so you don't think about killing living creatures. The way to train the mind from refrain to not take what is given. These are the 5 things that when you become a Buddhist, you say, I'm going to say this refuge prayer, and I'm going to do my best to follow the 5 precepts. So those are those are the 2 requirements. Out of all 3 schools, branches, those are the 2 requirements. So you've now done the refuge prayer, you've done the 5 precepts. Then we're going to go back to refuge. And this time we went from, single refuge prayer, the refuge prayer, and now we're going to recollections of the refuge prayer. And this is a time, especially when you are at home, you chant each one of these and you spend a moment and you recollect on the virtues of the Buddha. What he did, how he did it. You recall what you know about the Buddha. You recall about the virtues of the Dharma. You recall about the virtues of the Sangha. And the prayer for each one of these helps you generate the proper motivation, the proper feeling about the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. So finally, again, we're going to affirm to the 3 jewels. So we've recollected, we've pondered, and we did it 3 times in the evening, 3 times at night, and now we're going to, so this is like we're sealing it. We're going to affirm that we've taken a look at it in several different ways, and now we are affirming that there is no refuge but the Buddha. That's it. The only refuge is the Buddha. The only way of refuge is the Dharma. There's no other way of refuge than the Sangha. So what you've done is you've talked about it, recollected upon it, and now you've affirmed it. And this is not done with the other branches as much, but it's a definite. They really want you to understand Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, the refuge prayer. That's very important to the Theravada tradition. And this is a real important part. 5 subjects of recollection. There's the other 2 schools have something very, very similar. And when you look at this, they're talking about the nature of decay, the nature of being diseased, the nature to die. This is what the Buddha talked about, why he got involved in the enlightenment business anyway. He couldn't understand why anybody would reincarnate to become old, diseased, and die. It made no sense to him. And that's the nature, though. That's the nature of impermanence. And then you've got those 3 stanzas. And then the next stanza is the things that you are attached to are going to change and vanish. Nothing's permanent. And then when you die, you have nothing. The only thing that you have is your karma. That's what we call it karma. The Theravada, a lot of the schools call it kama. And that's all you've got going for you. Whatever your karma is, good, bad, or indifferent, and you die, that's all that's there, your mind and your karma. So it's very important to try to do as much as you can to generate good karma, not become attached to what is pleasing, to understand that you're going to die, you're going to get sick, and you're going to decay. Sometimes those get old is what the decay means, but sometimes we don't get to do that part. Sometimes we don't even, it's just, those are standard 3 ways, but it can come with one missing, so to speak. The final part of the Theravada practice is called Anumodana, and that means rejoicing. Now, the way this stanza is it's puna, that's the good merit. Merit, puna made by me, now or at some other time, be shared among all beings. They are infinite, immeasurable, by rejoicing in this cause, this gift of puna given by me. May all beings forever live a happy life and free from hate, and may they find the path secure and their good wishes all to succeed. I was late to the game on rejoicing. My teacher here, Dzogchen Rinpoche, was the first one that really made me sit up and listen to how important it is. Rejoicing in the good that other people have, rejoicing in their success that other people have, rejoicing in their spiritual success that other people have. When you start to wish goodwill towards any and everybody, that is generating bodhicitta, which is what we want to try to do, even though the Theravada system doesn't really care too much about bodhicitta. What you're doing is you are bringing Buddha nature, you're bringing positive wishes. For as far as the Theravada goes, this really shows about the law of being, we're all connected. Everything is connected. It's interdependent. And this helps generate that. The other thing that is a side benefit, and it's a better benefit as long as you don't try to do it to be a benefit, is you benefit in the good karma. If somebody does something very good and you rejoice in the goodness that they did, you get some good karma out of that too. Of course, the more you don't do it for that reason, the more karma you will get that is good. Then after that, practitioners will sit in Vajrayana, either single focus or analytical meditation. Vipassana would probably be the one that they're going to practice. And you don't do that for 10, 20, or 30 minutes, and then that's their practice. This is the practice of Theravada practitioner. That's pretty much it. All they have to do for the day. If they want to reflect and meditate at the end of the day, that's definitely something they can do. But what this practice I'm showing you, it got everything out of the way at once. And that's the difference of Buddhism versus a lot of the other religions. You don't go just once a week. You might go once a week to your sangha, where you go to practice. So most sanghas have a daily or certain days for certain practices, but you are encouraged to practice at home when you are not going to where the sangha gathers. So let's now go to the Mahayana. Mahayana is the biggest branch of all. What you see, especially in Mahayana, is that a lot of the culture of where the tradition came from, China, Japan, Korean, there's a lot of their culture that you see in their shrines. This is common with all forms of Buddhism. Buddhism, when they went to a country, they started to bring Buddhism to a certain country, they adopted some of the practices. So you're going to see some Taoist aspects in both Mahayana and in Japanese and Chinese Mahayana Buddhism. The major thing you need are the Buddha, obviously, same thing, Buddha higher than everyone else, flowers, incense, and candles. And some you will see, some will have food and water offerings. They'll offer food and water, and that's fine. The protocol for that is you put the food offering there, and the minute that it starts to go bad, you remove the food off of there, and you put the water someplace on the shrine in a container in the morning, and then at night you throw the water into some place that it needs some auspiciousness. You don't ever flush it down the toilet, or you don't throw it in the sink. But it's the same meaning with the flowers, incense, and candles that we talked about with the Theravada. The prostrations are somewhat different. And by the way, this skeleton practice that I'm presenting with the Mahayana is somewhat Zen. Zen is probably, there's Zen Buddhism in Japan, there's Zen Buddhism in China, there's Zen Buddhism in Korea. It's a very big part of Mahayana Buddhism. So you do the prostrations, you say the refuge prayer 3 times, you start with your hands enfolded in the prayer mudra, and then you go down and you make sure your hands, or excuse me, your elbows, arms, knees, feet, and head are on the floor. But then what's different about this is you turn your hands up, and it's like you're giving. You're making an offering. You're offering yourself up to the teachings, the Buddha, Dharma, and the Sangha. And by lifting your hands up a little bit, that's showing your devotion. What this tradition does next, I think, is wonderful. They chant the Heart Sutra 3 times. We covered the Heart Sutra fairly extensively last class because it's the major teaching, or the major sutra that you get to meet Avalokitesvara, Chenrezig, and Kuan Yin. What this does is, this is the definitive sutra of emptiness. And I put the first two paragraphs of the Heart Sutra up here. They chant, Heart Sutra is not that long. They chant it 3 times. And I put this up here, and a lot of these things I'm really going to suggest, if you are truly interested, is you go back and you listen to this on the web page, not just the simulcast, but the web page, and you can, stop it here, there, and write this down, or write down what we're talking about, and then you can look some of this stuff up online. Thankfully, there's a lot of things online that are better than it used to be. It used to be half the stuff you saw online about Buddhism was kind of hinky, to be kind. But the Heart Sutra is something everybody, Buddhist, Mahayana Buddhism and Tantric Buddhism, it's a very, very big thing. And why this section of tradition does this is the understanding of emptiness. And then another, praise to the Buddha. This prayer is very, very nice. It's I don't know the exact word to put it, but it's touching, I think. In all heaven and earth, none resembles Buddha. In all the worlds, everywhere, none is comparable. There is nothing whatsoever like Buddha. Homage to the guide of the Saha world and the 3 realms, benevolent Father to all beings, our original teacher in the 3 categories of transformation. So, talking about, again, how fortunate we are to Buddha Sakyamuni. He's the one that brought the teachings. The teachings have been around, but it was he that brought this to, the Kalpa that we're in now. This is fairly important too, because this is a complete practice all in of its own. This is the 10 great vows of Samantabhadra. Now, if you're a Tibetan practitioner and you see Samantabhadra like this, that's not what he looks like in that tradition. For now, he's a primordial Buddha in Tibetan Buddhism. In this, the Mahayana tradition of Buddhism, the Samantabhadra translates into universal worthy one. So he's seen as the deity of meditation and practice. And that's his specialty to this tradition. And this is important because this 10 great vows of Samantabhadra, in and of itself, is a complete practice. If you remember from what we talked about, even from the Theravada, starts out with respect to Buddha, respect to all the Buddhas, praise to the Tathagatayas, Buddhas of the past, present, future, and this Buddha. Third, to cultivate the offering, the giving. Fourth, repent all karmic obscurations. I'll briefly touch on that. Repent in Buddhism is much different than repent in Christianity. We'll talk a little bit about that shortly. But all of your negative karma you want to purify or repent. Fifth, to rejoice again in the merits of others. Sixth, to plead for the turning of the wheel of Dharma. That's, wanting the teachings to continue, that you are devoted to having teachings continue. Seventh, to plead that the Buddhas dwell in the world. That's that we will always have a Buddha of an era. This Buddha, Sakyamuni Buddha, eventually the teachings are going to be forgotten. And then it's going to be up to Maitreya, who will come back and bring Dharma back to the earth. So the ninth is to always follow the Buddha and study. Excuse me, that was the eighth. The 10th is to always conform to sentient beings. Ninth, the 10th, to transfer all merit to others. So what you have here is a complete practice. If you just sat and went through all of these, and you understood them well, and you went through all of these, that would be a complete practice. Now, then we will go through the refuge prayer one more time in this tradition. I take refuge till I'm enlightened in the Buddha, Dharma, and the Sangha. You say that 3 times, which is pretty self-explanatory. When you make the offerings in this tradition, you do that with your mind, and then what you put on the altar, you're making them to the 4 Buddhas of our time and of the past. Vajrayana, Lokana, Sakyamuni, Amitabha, Maitreya is the Buddha coming, the Buddha of the 10 directions, past, present, future, and especially the Bodhisattvas, Manjushri, Avalokitesvara, and this other one, Kasit Haraja. You got to excuse me a little bit. We're still having dental problems, so we lisp a little bit. This is a really interesting deity in Mahayana Buddhism. They don't have a lot of deities that they really practice per se, but when the Dharma came to China, they incorporated, there's a lot about ancestor worship, and this deity is like it helps your ancestors. He's the deity that they can, he will help guide them if they don't know anything much about Dharma. He's like the protector of your ancestors. And then you go right back to the 5 precepts. And they're very self-explanatory. I think I will take a moment here with sexual pleasure, refrain from wrong conduct and sexual pleasure. We did a complete segment of one class about sexuality, and the only thing to really remember is the Buddha. This is exactly what the Buddha talked about as sexual misconduct. You don't have sexual relationships with your relatives. You don't have sexual relationships with children. If you're married, you don't cheat. If you're engaged, you don't cheat. If you're single, you don't cheat with someone that's engaged or married. That was all the Buddha said. So again, what you're doing is you're training yourself to refrain from, all of these things. And of course, you've done all of these things probably in this lifetime, except killing. Well, we've all stepped on something. But you continually remind yourself that these are the 5 precepts that we need to avoid, or we need to train the mind on. I think training the mind on is a much better way of looking at this. For the evening practice, the instruction with this sect is that you sit with impermanence, review the day, and then either single focus. I think it's a good thing would be single focus into analytical meditation. I think that's the way most of these traditions do. And I think it's important to review the day. It helps with mindfulness, and it helps you to understand what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong. Okay, now we come to Vajrayana practice, tantric practice, Tibetan practice. I try to say the words because Vajrayana, it's not just all Tibetan, but for all intents and purposes, in this country, the only Vajrayana practice is Tibetan tradition. And the shrines are a little bit more elaborate, and that's mainly due to the deity practices. We talked in the class about Tibetan Buddhism, that a great part of it is that you become empowered or initiated to become the deity in this practice, and you do what the deity does, and then you come back to yourself. You don't run around town and say, well, I'm still Chenrezig. But you do the aspect of the practice, and it is not so much devotion to the deity as much as it is that these tankas, these statues, they are objects to help you meditate and to relate. And there definitely is some devotion that needs to be given, especially to the deities that you practice. I look at my idea when people that are tantric Tibetan practitioners say, well, what should I put on my shrine? First of all, you don't need everything. This is just my view, but I think it's shared by a lot of other people, and teachers included, is you put, the Buddha comes, the Buddha's always highest still, whether it's a tanka or it's a statue on the shrine, Buddha's highest. And I think that if you are initiated or empowered, you should have a statue or a tanka of that deity. For those that I don't know if I mentioned, but a tanka is, that's this this brocade. What it is it's a painting that's stitched into a brocade. It can be very elaborate. They all look pretty much the same because they all have certain special representations. But back to what to put on your shrine, I think if you are empowered to practice certain deity practices, you definitely need to have those around to help you with your practice. The other thing is that your sect that you belong to, the practices that are the foundation of that sect and tradition. And I'll use, for example, my Los Angeles Sangha with Dzogchen Ponlop Rinpoche. It's the Shangpa tradition. And what the Shangpa tradition, their deities that they practice are Chenrezig, Mahakala, Green Terra, and Milarepa, along with the thousand-arm Chenrezig practice of Nunye. My teacher here is pretty much the major Shangpa practitioner of Nunye. But, you might only be, let's say, that you've only taken the Chenrezig empowerment. But there's pujas for, these other deities, Mahakala, Green Terra, and Milarepa. Pujas are special practices devoted to the deity, and the date that they have them usually corresponds to the moon or the lunar cycle. The other traditions have, by the way, certain special practices. I don't know if they necessarily call them pujas, but even though you might not be empowered to practice all of these, since you're doing the puja practice, which you're allowed to do if you're not empowered, you should have maybe tanka or some representation of your sex deities. The other thing I think that some people are really, really drawn to a certain deity, and I have a friend that she's not an official Buddhist, but she has a great affinity for Green Terra, and she's put some of Buddhist practice together, but that affinity for Green Terra, the tanka that she has of Green Terra means a great deal to her. And so I think if there is something that you are really drawn to, that could have some insight about where you need to be practicing. Photos of teachers, that's very common. If you can see here as Sonis the Dalai Lama over here by the tanka. I don't know if this pointer's working. But, on my shrine, I've got Sonis Dalai Lama is one of my group teachers. Dzogchen Rinpoche is my other, and I have a picture of him with Kelo Rinpoche, who was his teacher. And then the head of the Kagyu sect, which the Shangpa belongs to, I've got a picture of Karmapa. It's very common to see photos of the teachers of the sex traditions, or at least Dalai Lama, in most shrines. You can put, you can put real flowers, you can put real food. We're going to get into the offerings here in a minute because it's very different with this flavor of Buddhism. But you can put those things on there, and the minute they start to wilt or turn, you need to get them right off. I've seen, it's just like, it depends a lot upon, I've seen some Tibetan traditions that put money in certain parts of the shrine, wealth vase. It's just, a lot of it, this is the bare minimum. What I've talked to you about is, the tanka or the statue of Buddha, deities that you're empowered. If you haven't done any of that, just maybe a deity you're drawn to. And, as your practice evolves, you can get more wrapped up in the shrine or what you want to put there. But I'm always reminded of Milarepa. He's the first great Tibetan that became an enlightened being. The story of Milarepa is phenomenal. And Milarepa lived and practiced in a cave. And his shrine was whatever his mind closed his eyes and whatever he saw as his shrine, that was his shrine. He would just gaze at the wall of a cave, and he did quite fine with that. He didn't need all the bells and whistles. This is the offering that is different from the others. There are 7 bowls, and I'm going to go through what they represent, and then I will tell you how they can be filled or used. The water for drinking, it's given to help suffering, thirst, the beings that are suffering from thirst. Those would be the people in the hell realms, ascended beings in hell realms, or the hungry ghost realms. And what's also important to realize about each one of these bowls is we did in the last tradition, we talked about the 10 vows of Samantabhadra. We're going to have something very similar, except it's a 7-limb prayer. And each one of these represent a major part of that prayer. So by doing the bowls in the correct way, that in and of itself is it could be considered, if you had the understanding, it's a practice. Because the first bowl is a water for drinking. That is also, besides helping those that suffer from thirst, it represents the homage or the prostrations. Water for bathing purifies negative karma. That's the offering part of this prayer. Flowers, beauty of enlightenment, open heart, that's the confession. Incense, morality, ethics, discipline, that is represented as rejoicing. Light, dispelling all darkness of the mind, requesting. Scented flowers, fragrance of perseverance, beseeching. Food offered to the 3 jewels, dedication. Music symbolizes the Buddha's wisdom and nature and the compassion that arises from it all. So each one of those, by filling these bowls up or recognizing what's in these bowls, that's the foundation of practice. Now, you can put water in each and every one of these bowls, and the way you do that is you start from right to left, and then you fill them up, and then at night you empty them from left to right, right to left, right to left. I need a compass. Anyway, start with the 4, and then 3, and then at the end of the night, you start with the 3 and go through the 4. And you dump that water into a container, you dry the bowls, and it's important that you turn the bowls upside down. And then put that water in some place, don't throw it in the sink or the toilet, put it someplace. Plants inside are wonderful. I know somebody that puts it into a fountain, and then it evaporates, and he believes that does wonderful things, which could be true. The other thing you can do, you can put the actual substance. We've got water, and then flowers. You could put a little flower in there, incense. A lot of people have sand in there, and they put incense stick in there. Light, that's not really part of this, the bowls, but that's in the middle. You could put a candle in there if you want. Scented water. I've seen some people put just a little thing of perfume in there. Food, you could put a little bit of food, something that represents food, like a little candy or something. And music, and a shell is one way. Now those things that you have in there, besides the flour and the whatever you put for food offering, if either one of those are going to spoil or turn, you take them off the minute that happens and fill them up with something, with new substances again. And you don't have to empty those, obviously, every night. The only ones that you empty in the same from the 3 to the 4 are ones that are full of water. The way I do this, and a lot of other people that I know, is there are things called tormas, and these are representations of certain things that can be placed in these bowls. And what I have is for like the This is the flower bowl. I have a torma of a flower that sits in there. And next to that is the incense bowl. And I have, there was that pointer. There's a torma that is a bundle of incense. It's not real, but I have that in there. And then the food torma, it doesn't really look like food, but there's a certain type of torma that is for the peaceful deities. That's what you put in there. And then there's some for wrathful, but you would not put in there. But those ones you put in there, they stay. They don't have to be changed, and you don't have to watch to see if they are going bad or anything like that. So you get your shrine in cups. And by the way, these bowls don't have to be elaborate and expensive. I know somebody that's got a very nice shrine, and they use teacups from a Japanese tea ceremony, those types of little cups, and it looks quite wonderful. The prostrations, every tradition does prostrations. I think that maybe some of the Nichiren sects, I don't think all of them prostrate, but the rest do. The Tibetan prostration is a little different. You put your hands in the prayer mudra. You start above your head, at your forehead, at your throat, at your heart, and then you go down. Now, the proper prostration is the one you see here, where she goes all the way down, flat on the floor. She puts her hands with the prayer mudra up above her head, and then she gets up and she does it again. She will I take refuge in Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha until I reach perfect enlightenment. Do a prostration, get up and repeat it 3 times. Everything is done in threes. When you're talking about certain things that get repeated over and over, or prostrations, threes are pretty much what you're going to see. The number of prostrations, number of times you say that. I mean, like we talked about Heart Sutra for the Mahayana, that was you repeated 3 times. Like the other 2 traditions, homage to the Buddha. Very straightforward as the other. Some people like to chant the Buddha's mantra. That's not necessarily, you don't have to, but you do pay homage to the Buddha. And like these other traditions we've talked about, the Tibetan tradition, you do chant and do your practices in Tibetan, but it has the English translation underneath each of the Tibetan words. And I think, again, I don't know if I mentioned this before, that, if you're going to practice it, I believe it's best to do it in the language of your tradition. But I also think it's equally important that you know what you're chanting, or you know what you're saying. So then you do the homage to the Buddha. And we talked about loving kindness with the Theravada tradition. In the Tantric Tibetan tradition, it's the 4 immeasurables. And one of the things I'm going to mention right now, I don't care what, I think it's just in every deity practice, especially maybe some of the wrathful know, but is the 4 immeasurables. This is part of every practice. Like you go to Dzogchen Renzing practice, and the Sandana will have this in it. It's the 4 immeasurables. This is to generate altruistic motivation. May all beings have happiness in the cause of happiness. May all beings be free from suffering and causes of suffering. May all beings never lose the happiness beyond all suffering. May all beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment to the familiar and aversion to the stranger. So that's a major part of this practice. And by the way, some of you that are Tibetan practitioners, you're looking at this and you're going, I've never seen anything like this. This is a standard practice without a deity practice in the middle of it. So because a lot of times people, the only practice they do is a deity practice. So this is for traditions that don't always do deity practice. There was the 5 thoughts in the Theravada tradition. This is a very important teaching in Tibetan Buddhism. It's called the 4 thoughts to turn the mind. And these are the 4 major things you need to understand in this branch of Buddhism before you really progress much further. Um, First is precious human birth, favorable for Dharma practice, is hard to obtain and easily lost. We've talked in many classes about the unbelievably good karma you have to have even just to be born a human being. To be born a human being that can find Dharma, learn Dharma, it's another feather in your cap. That does not happen. All you got to do is look at how many people are Buddhist compared to all other people in the world. There's not that many people. It's a major religion, but it's not by far not the most practiced. But you're taught a lot that this is something you really need to pay attention to. And the teaching a lot about it is that people need to be aware of how amazingly fragile this lifetime is. In the cosmic nature of Buddhism, lifetime is like a minute. You have so many of them. So when you have this lifetime that you can do so much good and move forward to become an enlightened being, that this is something you really need to understand how special it is and really revere it. Second, the world and all its inhabitants are impermanent. In particular, the life of each being is like a water bubble. It is uncertain when I will die and become a corpse, and at that time only Dharma can help. As I mentioned before, it's talking about how fragile, water bubble. And the thing that it tells you is that at the time of death, the only thing that's going to help you is Dharma. We'll talk a little bit about that, but in the next stanza. But third, let's go ahead and read that. When the death comes, there is no freedom, and karma takes its course. Since I create my own karma, I should abandon all unwholesome actions and always devote my time to wholesome actions. What I'm trying to say here is, the more time you can practice, the better off you're going to be, and the more better karma you're going to generate. We're hoping to generate more good karma off the cushion than just on. But what's important about the second and the third is that it talks a little bit about, what you can experience in the bardo. In the Tibetan tradition, when you die, you don't go into the next lifetime immediately. You go into a bardo. And that's a whole... want to know about the bardo, read Tibetan Book of the Dead. But in essence, the only two things you have when you die and are in the bardo is the Dharma practice and the teachings you've been given. Sometimes there's teachings called poa that you are taught that when you get very sick you need to do. And the only thing else that you have is your karma. Well, there isn't one and everything. It's your mind goes with you, with your karma and the Dharma that you know. And then fourth, just like the feast before the executioner leads me to my death, home, friends, pleasures, and possessions of samsara cause me continual torment by means of the three sufferings, the three poisons we've talked about. Again, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't have home, friends, or pleasures and possessions, but that's sort of the things that keep you locked into samsara, suffering. We talked about ultimate truth and relative truth. You can have relative truth with home, friends, and pleasures, but the ultimate truth is those cause you grief because we cling or we are adverse to. And when we're talking about going into the bardo, I don't mean to turn this whole conversation into a bardo, but what keeps people from moving through the bardo in a nice, continuum is they're too attached to their home, friends, and pleasures and possessions. That attachment is slowing down their progress there. The thing about why this is such an important teaching to learn is that before you can practice the more, basically all the other deities besides Chenrezig, the high tantra, lower tantra, mother tantra, father tantra, there's various different ones. You have to learn and you have to have a solid grasp of that, and then your teacher is going to give you the nandro, which we talked about. That's the 4 practices that you do 100,000 times. The Vajrayana mantra, the Guru Yoga, the prostrations, and the Mandela offerings. You do 100,000 of those, and once you've done that, you can begin to do the more advanced practices. But before you can do the nandro, you have to have a very good understanding and grasp of the 4 thoughts that turn the mind. Now, this tradition, I copied their precepts exactly like they were saying, but I prefer the training rule this is the abstaining. I don't like that as well as the training rule because it's not. It gets too much like commandments when you see it like this, abstaining, not doing. It's that you train your mind to understand. We also talked about in one of the classes that at certain times doing some of these things is a good idea. It will help you. So when you train your mind, you might know when it's a good time to lie. Sometimes that's called for if you're protecting someone that is in harm's way. We've had that discussion already, but that's the reason I'd like to see the training rule aspect put into this, is because it's training your mind to know and understand, not just to avoid. But that's definitely part of a Tibetan practice, is to look at the 5 precepts. Now, we talked about this with the cups, and we mentioned that it's very similar to the 10 vows of Samantabhadra. But this is the 7 limb prayer, and this is a complete practice all on its own, because now you can see the different things that you've seen. The prostration for the body, speech, and mind. You understand what that does. Then you present clouds of every type of offering, actually imagine. In the Tibetan system, you look, sometimes there's a part of a sandhana where you do a hand mudra about offerings, but you visualize, mountains, everything, anything that is meaningful to you. You see mountains of it going to the Buddhas and the teachers. What you're doing is you're giving as much of all of what you've had. You understand that a lot of what you've had is really not helping you, and you're offering it to, the Buddhas, the Bodhisattvas, and the teachers. Second, I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time. Now there is more. I like that a little better than repent. We have had all of these actions. We have done some horrific things. We have all murdered. We've all done about as much hideousness as you could possibly imagine. We've all done that. When you're talking about hundreds of thousands of lifetimes, or even if you want to think about 100 lifetimes, you're going to be doing some things that are not so good. And you keep mentioning this, that you are declaring all your actions. And it's not because you think you keep doing more and more bad things, but you're declaring more and more that you're not attached to what has happened, or you're not attached to the negative actions. You declare what they are, and you are helping get rid of them. So it's kind of like, it is somewhat like confessional, but it's not doing it to keep you from going to heaven or hell. It has nothing to do with that. It's what you are willing to acknowledge. And sometimes when you keep doing this, acknowledgement of negative actions, a lot of times things that we didn't think were so negative, now we start to understand, you know what, that wasn't so cool. I thought that was a fun thing. No, that wasn't. So what it's doing is it's continually helping you understand what has been positive or what has been negative for you to understand. Then again, we've got rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. I like in this version, it talks about all holy and ordinary beings. We have a tendency to not really appreciate other religious figures. And, a good example is, while I might not, the Pope might not like me, this new Pope, too much because of my sexuality, I admire him a great deal. And I rejoice in the wonderful way he started out his papacy. He is definitely somebody that is concerned about the poor. He lives very humbly in a small apartment off the city street, not the big, Pope Palace at the Vatican. He eats his meals with monks, novices, and it's the clergy, but there's all kinds of clergy. He's not separate from the people, and I rejoice in that because I see what good he does. And that is really helping other people. You don't look at necessarily, I don't agree with everything about you. You rejoice of everybody, what you see they do that is positive. And, ordinary beings, our friends, especially if our enemies, people we don't like, we see them doing something very special, something very beneficial, rejoice in it. Besides, this helps you to understand how interconnected we are, obviously, but it also gives you a sense of humility and that you're willing to take a look and you're willing to share. And the rejoicing, by the way, also is a very, very good thing to do, because what somebody does something very positive and you rejoice in it, some of that good merit comes to you. It's not taken away from that person, but you rejoicing in the benefit or the goodness of somebody else, that helps you be in the right state of mind and you get some of the benefit. If you're doing rejoicing just so you can get the karmic brownie points, that's not going to work. You do it, if you have to do it, fake it till you make it, but you rejoice sincerely in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Then please remain until the end of cyclic existence. You want to make sure that, for as long as we've got cyclic existence, we have a Buddha here. So you want the teachers and the Buddha to remain until the end of cyclic existence. You can say, well, we don't have a Buddha right now. We are still in the era of Sakyamuni Buddha, and we have enlightened beings that are enlightened because of the teachings of Sakyamuni Buddha. So we want to have, the right teachers here, and then to keep turning the wheel of Dharma for the living beings. You've got the Buddha that you want always to be there, and then you've got the teachings that you always want to be. The wheel of Dharma is always turning for living beings. And then this is very important, and it's not at the end of this Tibetan miniature practice I put together, but it should be. It wasn't in the liturgy of this tradition. I wanted to keep it as it was, but that's to dedicate. You dedicate your own merits and those of all others to the great enlightenment. When we talked about Mahayana, or the Theravada, that's concerned about you, the individual. Mahayana is concerned about, the individual and all other sentient beings. The Tibetan tradition is other beings first, you're second. And the reason that is because when you understand that we all are connected and we're doing this for the benefit of all sentient beings, you're a sentient being. You're doing it for your merit too. But when you understand that everybody's equal, that's a big step to the enlightenment of all beings. When everybody realizes that we're all here and we're all equal and we're all striving for the same thing. So you dedicate your merit. The merit is what you get merit for doing this practice or doing this prayer. You get merit because you are visualizing, prostrating, presenting, declaring. You've got to visualize that. So there's merit that comes from this prayer. That's why it is a complete practice all in its own. You dedicate that merit to the benefit of all others of the great enlightenment. And that's, all of us in here together. Lama Zopa Rinpoche, some of you are familiar with him. He is this amazing teacher, and he is the Rinpoche of, I call him the Rinpoche of mantras. This teacher, he's got some mantras, some very advanced mantras. He's got a mantra for about everything. And he is probably, besides mantras that he has, he really wants you to understand the importance of making dedications. And there should be, after this practice, a dedication all on its own. I dedicate the merit, and you go through several things of dedication. This is the dedication just for this little 7-limb prayer. But dedications are very important, especially when we start talking about mantra practice, which we're going to here in a minute. I'll go through that part of the mantra dedication when we get there. But dedication to the merit of all those others of the great enlightenment, or dedicate all this merit to the benefit of all sentient beings. Dedicate this merit, so you see that I become enlightened for the benefit of sentient beings. So you've always got something about sentient beings in your dedication. We talked at one point in time about maybe doing a Chenrezig practice, and I think we might do a full class on the Sindana, but that's only going to be for people that are willing to or have taken refuge or some sort of commitment to Dharma. I don't think it's really appropriate to give somebody the Sindana, even though you can practice Chenrezig without having an empowerment. I think you need to have the right frame of mind before you do the complete Sindana. In the meantime, to help kind of get you in the right mindset, I'm going to give you a little, it's a visualization and a mantra practice and meditation. So first thing you need to do is sit and really focus at the image of forearm Shenrenzing. We talked a lot in the last class about, he's white color for the purity. His hands are folded in prayer of the wish-fulfilling jewel. That's the bodhicitta, the altruism, his love for all other beings. The other arm, he's got the crystal prayer beads, rosary, and the other hand, he holds the pristine lotus. That's the promise to manifest continually in many, many different ways. And the steady momentum of counting your prayer, Tibetan beads or malas, that's the momentum that you have for practice. You should get probably a mala, or I think it's very important to count your mantras. So either get a mala, you can drop me a note and I'll send you someplace where I know you get a very good mala at a reasonable price, or just something that you can count with. Because the instruction I'm going to give you is that you look at Shenrenzing, you understand what he represents, love and compassion of all Buddhas, past, present, future. And you are going to sit and be very reverent and chant Shenrenzing's mantra. Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum. Chant it, and then if you can do 5 minutes, that is perfect. Just do this for 5 minutes and count how many times you say Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum. You don't have to count it, but some people like to, and I kind of like to, because when we talk a little bit later about mantra practice, the more mantras you have under your belt, the better. But Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, and while you're chanting this, visualize that golden and white light is coming out of Shenrenzing and it's entering you and imbuing you with unmeasurable love and compassion. Shenrenzing is giving this to you, and you are very grateful, and you want to say Mani Padme Hum, Mani Padme Hum, Mani Padme Hum, Mani Padme Hum. You can, the more you chant it, eventually you can get to where you can say very, very fast. And also when you're doing this, it's important that, Shenrenzing is above you, but he's in front of you. He's not way away, but he's above you and in front of you. And Mani Padme Hum, Mani Padme Hum, Mani Padme Hum, Mani Padme Hum. And that the compassion and love comes out of those light rays and into you. After 5 minutes, then there's a meditation that is part of like the instruction of this practice in general. And it's some people can do it and some people can't right away. It's basically opening you are going to sit with the pristine nature of your own mind. This is a mind that is just is. It's not averse, it's not attached, it's not thinking, it's just there. Some people are able to do this amazingly quickly. It's like you just, for a better word, you're consciously spaced out. I think that's a good way to put it. You're consciously spaced out. And forever, how many minutes you said the mantra, that many minutes you sit in meditation. If you can't do this, you can try it, and if it goes, try it for a while. If it's difficult, you go back to it. But then you do 5-minute meditation and meditate, so you go focus on Shenrenzing. And eventually after that, you do that where you've got the solid focus, then maybe the, consciously spaced out door for you, or just analytical meditation. A lot depends on the disposition of you and how much practice you've had. Some people that are taking these classes, they've practiced for a very long time. And other people, it's, very new. So, go at the pace that you go. And if 5 minutes is too much, settle for 2, 3. It's what your motivation is and what's in your heart that's the most important. It's not as many, it's not as many mantras. It's why you're saying the mantra. And then at the end of this, if you want to, you can say, I dedicate any merit to the benefit of all sentient beings. I dedicate the merit to the benefit of all sentient beings. Because you get merit from this. Anything you do that's Dharma related, there's merit. It's kind of nice about Buddhism because we know about the negative. We understand. But we also understand that we can create merit very rapidly. very good merit, depending on how, altruistic our heart is. So that's the end of the morning, and I put a little evening practice together, and this is the chanting of Vajrasattva. Vajrasattva is the Bodhisattva of purification, and I have given you the long mantra. It's called the 100-syllable mantra, and it's a very important mantra to know if you are going to become a Tibetan practitioner. And the reason being is this is in just about every practice sandana, and it's not just for the purification. This mantra purifies you, but when you see it in different practices, it's because it's saying, if I screwed up and said wrong or mispronounced or didn't visualize right or had my mind someplace else, I say this mantra, and that's, for me not paying attention to practice or just not knowing any better. I'm doing the best that I can. And especially if you're going to be doing some of this, you're trying to create practices on your own, it might be good to throw the Vajrasattva practice in, because if you're not doing it, the right way, this can help you. My suggestion for this, if you are going to be studying Tibetan Buddhism, learn the 100-syllable mantra and say it 7 or 21 times. And I'll say it, Vajrasattva Samya Anuma Palaya, Vajrasattva Tenvu Kritisha, Drido me bihava, Sutasho me bihava, Supasho me bihava, Anaratu me bihava. Sarvasita me priyacha, Sarvakama Sutsame, Titsam Sirim Kruhom, Ho ho ho, Bhagavan Savata Vigara, Mama Munche, Vara Baba Mahasami Sata, Om Hofe. Om Hofe is not part of the mantra, but that's it. And when you're doing this, if you're saying this mantra 7 to 21 times, start at 7. And after a while, you'll know this one, you can do it in your sleep. But as you're saying this mantra, see Vajrasattva in front of you, higher than you, white light coming through Vajrasattva, coming into your head and out through your body, and think that it is pulling out all the defilements, all the negative, all the bad karma. It's purifying you. Vajrasattva, this is the thing about it. He doesn't purify what you did, the cause. He purifies the effect. So what can happen is sometimes if you have got a karmic time bomb, right around the corner, doing Vajrasattva practice every day is a good thing to do. What I would suggest doing is at the end of your day, you sit and reflect. You reflect on what you did that you found, meritable. Don't always look at the negative. Look at everything that you've done. Put a little thought into what you were doing and be a little mindful about your day. Then do the Vajrasattva practice. And if 5 minutes, 10 minutes of meditation, choose single focus or analytical, whichever one you want to do. And that's, the foundation of tantric practice, Tibetan practice. Now, we talk a little bit, because so much of this is similar. There's prostrations. The Theravada is to the self, Mahayana self and others, to Vajrayana others and self. There's prostrations for each one. There's 3 jewels for each one. There's devotion to the Buddha for each one. There's 5 precepts for each one. 3 jewels for each one. Devotion to the Buddha. So you know that these are basic components for no matter what sect or tradition you need to practice. And if you're trying to just come up with a few things to get yourself, immersed a little bit in Buddhism, find one of these. We've given you the Theravada, the Mahayana, and the Vajrayana. Find one of those that suits you best and put it together for yourself. Put together a practice based on just these things. This is by no means saying, this is all you're ever going to have to do. Don't find a teacher. Find a teacher if that's where you're headed. If you're going to, practice, find yourself a teacher. But this gets you in a way that you can understand what the practices are, why you're doing them, and put together some things that, suit you. I've said many times, Theravada tradition is not for everybody. Mahayana tradition, not for everybody. Vajrayana tradition, Tantric Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism, not for everybody. The Buddha taught 3 distinct branches. And he told people in advance he was going to do it because a lot of them are very contradictory. But the Buddha understood people have, there's too many dispositions. There's not just one disposition. And when you also understand the concept of emptiness, um, you cannot say that either one of these traditions is not a true tradition. Sometimes the Theravada gets a little bit unnerved about Mahayana, especially Vajrayana practice. But His Holiness the Dalai Lama has always said, you don't dismiss the Theravada because that's the foundation. We talked about that earlier. That is the foundation of Buddhist practice. So that gives you some idea about what you can do there. So now let's talk a little bit about what we can do. When you do a practice, that is what's called on the cushion. You're practicing that, but I think it's becoming more and more clear that Buddhists need to not just do what's on the cushion, but they need to start becoming involved and put their practice into action for the benefit of other sentient beings and yourself. The better person you can become is that you can do more things for other people. And that is what Mahayana and Vajrayana Buddhism are trying to get you to understand. You need to be the best person you can because you are here to help other beings. Especially if you take it in Bodhisattva vows. That's when you are officially, I'm in it for the long haul. Everybody else is I got to take care of everybody else. So how can we do that? Mm-hmm. I think that, let's look at the 5 precepts. And instead of just looking, I think to really understand how you can use the 5 precepts is besides the apparent, the obvious of what each one of these do, look at the abstract. We have the first precept where we're talking, you're not going to be killing things. But what ideas, what do you kill in yourself? Never let it happen. Never let it bloom. What does your negativity kill in yourself? How do you kill things in others? It's not just the murder aspect, but, we can end certain things very abruptly for ourselves and for other people. And look at how you can do that. And you can be, the more you look at this and the more you understand this, the more you're going to find ways that you kill different things. Not just the animals or the sentient beings. What do you steal? You're not supposed to steal objects. What ideas do you steal? Other people's thoughts. What do you take credit for that isn't yours? And the other way to look at it is, what do you rob yourself of? We have there's habits human beings have that they either are entirely too attached to themselves or they're entirely too adverse. And a lot of times when you're really adverse and you don't like yourself very much, you're robbing yourself of a lot of things that can make you happy in life because you can't see them. So when you're attached or adverse, this part of robbing will become something maybe to think about. The sexual precept is about cheating. How do you cheat at work? How do you cheat on the tennis court? What do you cheat yourself out of? There's not just one way to cheat. Everybody's got their own little, twist and turn on which one of these they, specialize in. Most people are going to find one or two of these that when you look at them in the abstract, that's the ones that hang them up. Obviously the lies. Lying is something that is easy to get caught up in. A lot of times it's just, how do you exaggerate? But the most important, there's 2 ways, basically 3 ways of lying that are the very most dangerous. And the first is, what lies do you tell yourself? We can come up with this script that we tell ourselves over and over and over. We know it's not true. And it can either be, by the way, it's not just, I'm Mr. Wonderful. It can be, how worthless am I? We tell these lies to ourselves. And eventually they don't become your truth. People say, well, you talk about something, it'll manifest. No, it becomes your delusion. Anything that manifests out of something like that it's a delusion. So the lies you tell yourself. The most insidious part of lying also is what's You know, a professional liar knows the half-truth. That's somebody that really's got this down and needs to work on it. The half-truth is when you say something that is true. It's like the first part of it, but then you know, say something that is totally out of, not even close. You know, and a good way, people said, what's a good example of a half-truth? Look at headlines look at headlines on either a very conservative website or a very liberal website. You'll find that the headline doesn't really match what the story is all about. The headline is get there for you to grab onto it, and then you think this is going to be about this headline. You read the story, and it's not much about the headline at all. That's a good example of a half-truth. But people do it in some very cruel and very cunning ways. You know, the half-truth is dangerous. It's a dangerous game to play, and it doesn't have very good consequences. The other part of truth telling is the one that always is going to be truthful. You know, I tell the truth no matter what. I tell it like it is. And I've had a few people like that I've talked to, and I've just flat out told them, you know, you're not telling the truth to be truthful. You're being truthful because it hurts. You found a way to be really mean and vindictive by telling on people. It's not for their benefit. It's just for your benefit to be cruel. So, you know, any of these people that want to raise their hand and say, I tell the truth all the time, you know, there's certain times that telling the truth is not what we're going to talk here about. It's not skillful. Intoxicating. Besides mind-numbing substances, what you get intoxicated by. A lot of people are intoxicated by sex. A lot of people are intoxicated by the mundane. They don't want to think about anything past what I want and what I can get. But, you know, if I look at anything that you're obsessed with, whether it be, you know, sex or it be, you know, collecting coins, anything that you're obsessed with is intoxication, and it's dangerous. And look at the, you know, if you're talking about addictions, it's not just, you know, somebody, I drink too much, or you know, it's like we were talking about coin collecting. Look at whatever you are obsessed with, positive or negative, and that's what you are intoxicated by. Now, I mentioned it briefly in the last part. It's called skillful means. Now, the most common story that is talked about skillful means is this. It's in the parable of a burning house. A man comes home to find his house in flames and his children playing inside. When he tells them from outside to flee the house, they refuse, as they would rather play with their toys. The father finally entices them from the house with descriptions of many colorful carriages waiting outside. They exit to find only an ox cart, symbolizing the one vehicle of Buddhist way that can carry everyone. One vehicle includes all the various skillful teachings for saving beings from the flames of worldly suffering. The sutra emphasizes that the father in the parable is not lying, because he lured the children from a burning house to save them. This is very, you know, it's relative, and it is ultimate truth. You know, it's kind of weaved in. I think the best thing that I have ever said to help somebody understand skillful means is that you're using your wits and knowledge and understanding to create the best solution to a situation you're involved with. You know, this is not necessarily, this is part where you say, I don't ever lie. Well, sometimes that's what's called for, to be skillful. And you know, I was an agent for 20 years, 15, 20 years. And I really understand what the Buddha talked about of dispositions of people. There were some people I could be very nice with about getting something done, and there were other people that I just had to be belligerent with, because that's the only way they understood things. But I really didn't like I don't like confrontation. A lot of people think I do. I'm not really, especially anymore. I can't stand it. When I was an agent, I would be in a lot of meetings, and it would get very confrontational. And then a friend of mine, she was a New Age astrologer. She was quite a character. She said one thing, though, that really stuck with me, is that when you are in these types of situations, just let somebody be right. And you know what she was saying was, it was the height of skillfulness, because, you know, somebody would say something that I thought was insane. But, you know, we're not going to get anywhere if I say, you know, you're nuts. And it became, I would talk to them about it, and I said, I can get that. I understand that. But then could you maybe look at it this way? And 9 out of 10 times, just by me acknowledging them, that they could have input, they could see that the other way was, a more beneficial and much more elegant way of doing things. I call elegant is the less amount of stress and chaos from going from point A to point B. And it worked in reverse with me sometimes. It let me understand that I was not always going to be right, that I could be a self-absorbed jackass, and I need to listen to other people too. So it works really. That's how I look at skillful means. You're using what you have, what you know, to help and benefit other people. It's not what you knew, telling these things to hurt somebody. It's how you benefit other people. If you can learn to be skillful in your life, that's going to help you a great deal. And these are things that I call, what we're talking about today, about these ways of, the 5 precepts in action. These are all things what I call arts. Arts means that something, some of us are very good at some things and some of us aren't, but there's nothing that we can't become better at through practice, and that is what I call an art. So, the art of skillful means, the art of the precepts, those are things that it takes some time to work with, but it's really worth your time to spend some time looking at these and how you can, use them in your everyday life. That's how you put compassion into action. That's what Buddhism, to me, really is the essence of, is to be what you can do with other people off the cushion. So this is my, this is my biggie. If you really want to understand the psychology and the pathology of who you are, is for 2 days. Slow everything down, have a little notebook by your pen, and before you do or say anything, ask yourself why you're going to just do or say it. Now that, can be, well, I got to talk to my mother. Well, why do you have to? It takes a little time to do, but just ask yourself, why am I doing or saying this? Am I doing it because I feel guilty? Am I doing it because I want to harass? Am I doing it to try to prove myself better? You don't judge at all. Do not become attached or adverse. Just be what is going on. It doesn't matter. We're not going to share this. You shouldn't share some of these things with everybody. These are things for you. So you get to understand your motivation. You really can understand who you are. You take that list of things you have thought about or did, why you thought about or did them, and you're going to see, even in 2 days, you're going to see some very distinct patterns. You're going to see some things that you're very adverse to, and you will do anything to just not deal with them, and then you can see things that you're very attached to. You can see where you like to be mean. You can see where you like to be, you will say certain things to people to be loved or to get attention. Don't judge. It's the worst thing you could do. Just be very open and honest with this, because then you'll understand these are some things I need to work on. I see this. Now, the thing about Buddhism that is different than some other faiths and tradition is you're not supposed to use it to beat yourself up. You're here to understand your mind and how to work and create with your mind, because your mind is how everything else manifests. And to beat up on yourself, that's not going to do you any good. It doesn't matter what you've done. You have regret, you have remorse, but you can't beat yourself up all the time, or you're never going to get anywhere in life. So check what your motivation is. It's one of the easiest ways to become skillful and to understand who you really are. The teaching is called the 8 Worldly Concerns. It's a very, very good teaching. I've talked with you about attachment and aversion being the same thing. They're just different sides of the same coin. There's this. I'm either attached to it or I'm adverse to it. A lot of times I can go back and forth all the time. But this tells you more and more how it works within your life. Attached to getting and keeping material things, aversion to not getting material things or being separated from them. We want things badly. Sometimes the things we will go to get material things is astonishing. And sometimes the thought of losing everything or being separated from is so we will do anything to make sure that doesn't happen. And what the teaching is you're in the middle. You have things, but you work. It's nothing. It's an art. You're not going to perfect it. It's something you're mindful of. I'm not going to become so attached to just keeping things, and I'm not going to be adverse to losing them. I don't like it necessarily, but it's happening. It's going to happen. It's called impermanence. Nothing's going to last. It's sometimes, as Holiness says, sometimes not getting what you want is an incredible miracle. So you work with your attachment and your aversion to things. The other is the second part of the 8 worldly concerns is attachment to praise, hearing nice words, and feeling encouraged, aversion to being blamed, ridiculed, and criticized. Same thing. We always like to hear nice words, nice things, feel encouraged. And it's nice, and I think you should praise, and you should say nice things, and you should be encouraged. But if you are addicted to that, and you're only doing things to become praised, hearing nice words, and feeling encouraged, you're failing. That sounds harsh, but if you are doing everything to please other people, you're not going to be living your life. You are basically trying to gain favor, and aversion to getting blamed, ridiculed, and criticized. There are times we need to be blamed, ridiculed, and criticized. Now, that doesn't mean that you cuddle up to those all the time, but you understand. I'm not going to be doing A, B, and C just so people can pat me on the head, say nice things about me, and make me feel encouraged. I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do, and it's the way I want to live my life, and I'm not doing it just to hear nice things. On the other hand, if I'm doing something wrong or somebody needs to talk to me, I'm not going to get all pushed back. I'm not going to get all mad if somebody's talking to me about things that I need to maybe be reminded of. And the other part of it is if you are so afraid to do things, it's motivation again. If you're doing things because you don't want to get blamed, ridiculed, or criticized, that's the first thing you're thinking about. This is the reason I'm doing it. I don't want to be blamed. I don't want to be ridiculed. I don't want to be criticized. You're failing again. You're putting the negative or the aversion or the attachment into, that's what's controlling you. Okay, the other is attachment to having a good reputation, aversion to having a bad reputation. That's a little tough. That can be tricky. What it's basically doing is saying, you don't do things because you just want to be, thought of as a wonderful person. You do the things because that's what the right thing is to do. And you're not averse to having a bad reputation, because with some people, that's not such a a negative thing. But the key to it is you don't do things, and the main motivation is so you won't have a bad reputation. If I say to somebody, "Why'd you do this?" So I won't have a bad reputation. You're failing. Why are you doing this? Because I want to have a good reputation. That you're failing. Because see, if you're looking about having a good reputation or a bad reputation, any of these, you're not in the moment. You're looking at the future. The future says I'm going to be good, or I'm talking about the future, good or bad. That's all future. That's where that tells you if you're doing things for those reasons, you're failing. And it doesn't mean that you will fail your life. What you're failing to do is you're failing to see the reality and the truth and the concept of what's really going on. The final one is attachment to sense of pleasure in general and aversion to unpleasant experiences. There again, when we do things just to be pleased, I want to do this because I want to feel pleasure. It's not so good. And I won't do this because it's unpleasant. I'm afraid of this. I will not do this. I won't like the experience. Well, maybe you won't. But you're never going to know unless you try. So, this is the sensual thing. A lot of people, they get so seduced by, the pleasures of the senses. Not just sensual, the senses. I want to see, I want to hear, I want to feel everything, pleasurable. And, once again, same side of the different side of the same coin. Unpleasant experiences. They're going to happen. And the thing is when you run from things that are unpleasant, You keep running and they keep growing. And I think you can all relate to this. Something that has not been, you put this off. I put this off because I don't like the pain. I don't like the pain. I don't like the pain. And then when it comes, it's either going to be one of two things. It's going to engulf you in so much pain, you're going to be absolutely mortified and paralyzed, or you're going to feel like the biggest idiot in the world, like, this is me. But I'm really adverse to something. I don't want to do this. I will find a way to procrastinate about some things that is embarrassing. And then when I really feel like a jerk is when I finally, okay, I'll do it. It's going to be unpleasant. Well, you know what? It's not half the unpleasant as I thought it was going to be. And it was just one way that I was playing out my own drama. It either will be horrible or it's not going to be that horrible at all. And you're going to feel like, a clown. That's pretty much the experience I've heard from other people too. I'm not the only clown in the room. The other fine way that we can practice in action. This is kind of what the Eightfold Path. The Buddha was trying to, I think, really get people to understand. Practice during, off the cushion during the day, because if you follow all of these, you're doing things off the cushion, even the things that you think are on. The right insight. It's the key to that is you see things as they are, not how you want them to be, or not. That's the key. You're not deluding yourself. You see what it really is. You give up, the playtime of what I think I would like it to be. Because when you understand what it truly is, then you can have real intention, real motivation. Until you really know what's going on, you're seeing things as they really are, how can you have the right intention? So you have the right intention, which is understanding your motivation. And that can work. Sometimes, it goes in reverse. You want to have better insight? Make sure you know what your motivation is. You know what your motivation is. We've done this in the other exercise. By knowing your motivation, you're going to understand right speech and you're going to understand right action. Motivation, all of these things can kind of go around and help each other. They are interdependent, they're all connected. Everything's connected. So, right speech, right action, you know about that. Right livelihood. We've talked about this in one of the other classes. There's certain jobs, as your practice goes, you don't want to do. And I've given the example of a friend of mine. He began his practice. He's a very successful bartender in West Hollywood. Very well liked, made very good money. Very nice, he's a nice guy. And the deeper his practice got, one day he called me and he said, I don't really know about my job anymore. And I said, well, what's the deal? He said, well, the getting people, intoxicated is one thing, but he was starting to have a real problem about how he was told not to really care how drunk somebody was, just to keep serving them. And he realized that, what, that's not the right thing for me. He understood that livelihood is going to change, and that wasn't the right one for him. And I can honestly say things turned out very, very well for him. I don't think he would go back to bartending, for all the money in the world. The other thing is right effort. That's number 6 here. Holiness Dalai Lama talks a lot about, you've got to put the effort in. It's not always going to be easy. Don't sugarcoat it. Don't make it worse than it is. But you've got to put some effort into it. You can't practice, you've got to put some effort into your practice. It's got to be a living practice. It's got to be one that's off the cushion. That's what it doesn't have to be. That's what we're striving for. And it takes effort. And when you start having effort that's paying off, you're making some progress in your life because you put some effort into it. Everything is more meaningful. It means something because you put something in. It's a cause and the effect. I put this effort in, and this has bloomed and blossomed for me. Right mindfulness. In a world of multitasking, mindfulness is really, it doesn't get the attention it deserves. It's a big word in Buddhism. And it basically is, from you start looking at your motivation, And you start paying attention. Mindfulness is paying attention. You pay attention to what you're doing while you're doing it when you do it. And it's one of those things similar to the exercise we were talking about with motivation. Mindfulness takes some practice. For a long time, I didn't do much of anything. I practiced. That's all I did. When I was getting my life back together, that was what I was capable of doing. And then when it came time to, do some things again, I had to become mindful about things that I used to didn't have to be so mindful of. And right, meditation. We talk about spending time in meditation, and there's only a couple of sects and traditions that don't say it. You need to meditate. It's some people go, oh my God, it's the last thing I want to do is meditate. Can I do something without meditation? Well, of course you can. But, look at your effort. Why won't you put a little effort into that? Well, I don't like it. Well, you're not supposed to like everything. You just got that about the 8 worldly concerns, So what if you don't like meditation? There's a lot of things you're not going to like. It doesn't mean that you just, you get a free pass and avoid it. That's a lot what's wrong with Western culture is we look for things, we do any and everything to get that free pass. The thing is we want the free pass, but we don't want to be compassionate enough to give everybody a free lunch. That's a real problem that we have here. But when somebody said to me one time, well, I'm not Buddhist, right? I kind of like, she would say your exact word is, I'm tinkering. She said, I'm tinkering with Dharma. And I said, well, if that's what you want to do or call it, that's fine. She goes, but what, I don't want to meditate. I said, well, you don't have to. And so she said, well, what could I do besides that? What would you suggest? And I said, just look at what you daydream about. Because anybody that says I can't meditate, if they daydream, they can meditate. And you can control your daydreams a little bit. So, that was the instruction I gave her, and it worked very well. So maybe it will work for you. If you don't like meditation, practice with your daydreams. Put a little effort with your daydream. And you might be surprised. You meditate whether you know it or not. When you're setting in line, we're going to talk about that in a minute. But, you daydream. If you can daydream, you can meditate. You can be a tremendous meditator. And a lot of people that really don't think that they can meditate, they've already been doing a lot of it and don't even realize it. Now, this is kind of etc. These are a few things that I'm going to leave you with that will really, I think, help in, making this Dharma part of your life. It's something that you are, mindful of, and you want to do things outside of just the practices that we've talked about. And recognize impermanence in your day-to-day life. And, you can do that by looking at the newspaper, looking at things, and seeing how other things are impermanent. Look to yourself. When you do the thing about the motivation, maybe spend a few days after that, look at what's impermanent in your life. You thought there was milk, it was gone. It can be somewhat dramatic. I went to the doctor and I found out that, this is going to be done. That there are things that are not permanent in my life. Nothing is permanent in your life. And besides just looking at what is not permanent, look at the things you try to make permanent. That's a real good way to recognize your issue with impermanence. You want to make that vacation time, last forever. You want to take that one moment and that feeling and hold on to it, and hold on to it, and hold on to it. And what you're doing is you're holding on to nothing. And the world's, you're holding on to nothing and everybody else is going right by you. Look at what you try to make permanent. When you try to make anything permanent, it stifles and nothing grows. Nothing can change. Hollywood occasionally can really get it right. The movie Groundhog Day is a great thing about, why things need to be impermanent. You're living the same thing, every day. If things were, you'd never grow or change. You'd stay right where you're at. some people say, well, that's not such a bad idea until you really realize what a delusion you've created. And, impermanence is something that helps, expedite us out of a delusion. So look at how impermanence is that you can see in your life and other things that you try to make permanent. And you're going to learn a great deal about yourself. And this is what you practice. Then recognize interdependence in everyday life. We've done the example, and we'll do it right now with, I've got a plastic comb here. And, I had to buy that from somebody who had to package it, who had to make it, who had to go to somebody that had the raw material. The person that, had the raw material, somebody had to, grow food for him and grow cotton to make clothes for him. And then somebody had to, we talked about the packaging, we talked about this, somebody had to make the comb. Somebody had to come up with the color of it. Somebody had to do, that's not the best example, but you get the general idea. Everything is connected. There's very few things that you can't find that eventually everybody's got a bit and piece to. The example we used at one time was the guy's backpack, and it was very interesting because everybody in the class could see it and were chiming in. It goes down to the color, the this, the that. Everything is connected. I'm sorry about the comb analogy. That wasn't quite as swift as I was hoping it would be. Give. If you've taken the vow of the Bodhisattva, you are to give to anyone you see in need. But you need to be skillful. When giving, it doesn't mean necessarily just money. If you see somebody on the street that's suffering, you give to them something. You be skillful. If somebody's sitting on the street drunk, don't go and give him money because he will go. That's something very skillful. He will go out and get more alcohol and hurt himself even more. And so people, sincerely, I don't have anything I can give. Yes, you can. If you're seeing somebody that's suffering, do Tonglen meditation. We're going to talk about it here at the end, but I've given you the instruction before. Sit, breathe in their pain, breathe out compassion, happiness, and healing. You can do that. You don't even have to. You just walk by this person and you do the Tonglen practice. The one thing, though, that I'm going to talk to you a little bit about, if you're going to give, one thing you can do when you give to people on the streets is don't treat them like they're people on the streets. Talk to them like they're a human being. I know what it's like to be, living on the street. I think most of you know my story. And one of the things that was the most distressful for me is that I'd lost the ability to talk with people. As you can tell, I like to talk. But nobody wants to talk to somebody that's living on the streets. And it becomes fairly apparent that you're living on the streets. You tell you how you learn. You look at how sunburned and windburned and old somebody's face is from being out in the sun and their shoes. That tells you exactly how long they've been out on the streets. Other people have got severe mental problems and something like that. But, just somebody that's, local depressed drunk, that pretty much tells you. And, give to them. Look at them in the face. Talk to them. You give your attention. You're giving something. The other thing is, give whenever you're in pain. And I'll tell you a little bit about this. I think I mentioned it before, but it's worth mentioning again. So a teacher, I wanted to learn something. Oh, let's go do 4 thoughts to turn the mind. That's all we did was 4 thoughts to turn the mind. And when we were upset, he said, oh, go out and do something for somebody else. Find somebody that's going through what you're doing and do something for them. It didn't matter, what the situation, what the cause was. That was probably one of the most enlightened beings I've ever been around in my life. And I didn't even know it at the time. The best thing you can do when you are in distress or trouble is give. You do the Tonglen meditation. Again, sit to yourself. You're so depressed or whatever, sit in there, think of all the people that you know are depressed, breathe in their depression, and breathe out healing. And you'll be very surprised because you're part of those sentient beings that you're taking care of, and you will feel better. I don't know how many people have told me that they went through some very difficult things, and I've shared this with them. And they went and donated their time to things. And what they've always come back saying is, I realize I'm not the only one in pain. I know it's not just me. Everybody's going through something. And when you are giving and you're doing something for somebody else, your mind is not just focused on you. It's like you're giving yourself a break from the torment that you're going, because a lot of these things, unfortunately, when we are really suffering, is we're trapped in aversion and attachment. We're so worried, we're so upset, we're so hurt that all we can do is think about me. Averse, attached, averse, attached. When you're thinking only about yourself, you've got to have one of those too. You're going to be averse to you cling to yourself, you're adverse. You cling to yourself, you are attached. One or the other. The other thing is be present. That's another thing about this multitask society we have. Be present. And what present means is similar to the meditation instruction. Not too loose, not too tight. But, pay attention. Be present. And some people need to really practice that because they're thinking about 10 or 12 different things and they're sitting right next to somebody that's trying to talk with them. Be present. To be present requires you to be in the moment. And to be in the moment, you can't be, dinking around in the past that is a delusion, and a future that's a delusion or an illusion too. Being present is being in the moment and not dwelling in the past or the future. And I see being present is really difficult for a lot of people I know. The final thing is the Tonglen walking meditation mantra practice that I created that people have really benefited from. I know this was the people say to me, what part of practice, what did you do that was most beneficial to help you when you were going through what you were going through? And this is what I didn't like, meditation so much. I liked Tonglen. I wanted to make something that was, I could combine a little meditation, mantra, and Tonglen all at the same time. Tonglen is when you breathe in the pain of others and breathe out compassion. You can be very specific if they're going through things that you're going through. You see something happening in a bad part of the world, you do Tonglen for that. And you can do it 2, 3, 5, 10 minutes. It'll do a long time. What I decided to do is I was walking a lot. And it was not because I had to with living on the streets. I walked a lot because that was my mode of transportation. And I enjoyed it because what I did is I would pick a mantra, I would walk with my mind present, and anybody I saw, and we couldn't do it for everybody, I'd breathe in their pain and out whatever the mantra was. And I started with the money pay me home. And I committed to doing 1 million of them in less than a year. And walking, doing the breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out. And of course, you didn't do it all the time, but have the money pay me home, money pay me home, money pay me home going in my mind all the time. And it didn't take a year to do. And then, I started to do other mantras. I did 100,000 Vajrayana mantras doing the same thing. Walking, tongue, breathing in, breathing out the purification of Vajrayana, breathing in people's pain, breathing out Vajrayana. You can do it for the Jambahala, the wealth deities, as long as you're trying to be wealthy for everybody. You're looking for wealth of knowledge, not just your own finances. Find one of the deities if you are going to practice Tantric Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism. This is a really good way to really understand it. You're doing something, compassion for somebody. You're paying attention by meditating, and then the mantra. It doesn't matter if you know the mantra or not. If you don't know what this mantra is going to do. I showed you in the last class of how many different ways on money pay me home touches. It's 6 levels, 6 different ways it works with somebody. That's with all mantras. Find one that you have an affinity to. If it's Green Terra, do it Green Terra. To Terra to Saha. You find these things. Find a deity that you are have an affinity to, and that will help. This has probably been the longest class that we've had, and I maybe should have done part 1 and part 2, but we're coming to a close on these sessions. I want to go over a little bit about what the next class is going to be about. The next class is the final class in this series. The series is going to repeat, but it's going to be a little different. I want you to send in what your thoughts, questions are. What do you want to know more about? What don't you know? What do you think I've talked too much about? It's whatever you think about Dharma. Everybody's got some thing they don't totally understand. A lot of people, like I did this, I didn't want anybody to know I didn't know anything. So, I spent a lot of time where I could have been practicing, running around trying to figure out something that a person could have just told me if I would have asked. So think about what you want. You go to the Facebook page or the web page, the Nalanda web page, and let me know what you want to know about. And if there's places where you can send me messages. If you don't want it to be public on the Facebook page, that's fine. Send me a message, and then that's what we're going to do for the last class. And again, we didn't. Okay, I'm sorry, you guys didn't get the recognize the premise. I'm sorry you didn't get that slide. We're still doing the one PC, one Apple thing, and we got it. It's better. Anyway, I gotta say at the end of every class, we hope that we can do these by donation only. And some of the things that are coming up, we talked about an evening with the, somebody, the monastic from all three traditions, sitting down with me, and we're going to have a discussion. And it's not going to be what we're different, but how we are the same and what we can do to, benefit other people. The other thing, we're going to have a class about Tibetan medicine, and we've got a very, very wonderful doctor that's going to come and give this discussion. And Tibetan medicine is really amazing. Some of it is similar to Chinese medicine, some is not. It's been very effective for a lot of people, including myself. So that's sort of the type of things, and by having donations, we can have these things. We're going to be having in our own building, and the contributions, anything that we get, is helping to get our social programs off the ground. There's a lot of people struggling these days, and we want to be there for as many people as we can. By giving a donation, invest in your own future. Helping support things that helps other people is very good, as long as that's not your only primary purpose for doing it. And I say this all the time, it's not the amount of money that you would donate to us or to anybody else. It's how much altruistic thought is in going into this. And, it's a good way to start nurturing the heart. Some people like to send a check. That's the address, 535 South Curzon, number 2D, Los Angeles, 90036. Your tax deduction, your contributions are tax deductible, and you get the full deduction, and they're greatly appreciated. I hope you've got something out of this. We've covered a lot of things, but I think that it tied in together. Hopefully, what you can do, if this is too much, is watch as much as you can, and then go back a little bit later. I want to thank you, and I hope to be seeing you for our final class in 2 weeks. All right.